Hey there! Back during Path of Exile's 3.19 Lake of Kalandra League, I made a series of videos mostly talking about the unfortunate problems that the league faced at the time. Unfortunately, GGG was unable to patch the league into something that was really ever very good. However, now with 3.20 on the horizon, it looks like GGG has been listening to feedback and they've put out a number of development manifestos talking about what changes they're making for 3.20 in order to address the problems that Lake of Kalandra faced. In this video, I'm going to go over those 4 development manifestos, talk about how the game is changing, and whether or not this is really going to fix the problems we were seeing in Lake of Kalandra League. So the first development manifesto that they posted was for Archnemesis. Now, Archnemesis has been wildly unpopular since its debut, back in Archnemesis League. It's really only gotten worse with each successive league as GGG kept trying to fix it, kept trying to make it something that would achieve their goals, and players just kept being upset and unhappy with it. So GGG is finally throwing in the towel, giving players what they've been asking for, and just straight up removing Archnemesis and rolling back to the system that Path of Exile used prior to Archnemesis. So what this means is that instead of these one-word names that do a bundle of things, we'll go back to descriptive sentences under rare monsters that explain what they do. And these effects should be more focused than the Archnemesis modifiers we have now. They did say that they're going to be keeping some of the new stuff. Presumably, I assume they're going to be keeping the modifiers that granted abilities like Ice Prison and Toxic and whatnot, because for the most part, players didn't really have a problem with those. Now, one of the problems introduced last league with Archnemesis is that they had specific rewards tied to specific modifiers, which meant that when you got these super valuable combinations that would reward huge currency explosions, players would go out and find a magic find color to last hit the mob and get absolutely ridiculous explosions of loot, like 50 divine orbs, like more than most people might get an entire league in the past, all from killing a single mob. It was ridiculous. The change GGG is making to eliminate this absolutely ridiculous playstyle is that they're making it so that the specific rewards that rare monsters get will no longer be tied to specific modifiers, so that you can't know ahead of time what a monster is going to drop when you kill it. This will straight up kill the ridiculous magic finder color stuff going on, and thank goodness, that was insane. Now, of note, some of these special rare monster drops will still exist, and they say that some of the conversion ones will still exist. So it might be possible to still get the ridiculous loot explosions you could last league. You would just have to have a magic find person in your party full time. Because the individual monsters are no longer going to have a bundle of different effects they do, in order to make sure that rare monsters that got, say, 2 attack modifiers might still, not just instantly fall over dead, rares will now get a life, increased item rarity, and increased item quantity buff for each modifier that they have. Their next manifesto was focused on jewels and ailments. So ailments were kind of in a bad place in 3.20. Specifically, I mean monsters inflicting ailments onto players. All of the Archnemesis monsters running around in combination with the Eldritch altars, which felt mandatory, meant that it felt effectively mandatory for your build to have complete ailment resistance to every single ailment, which was incredibly difficult for some builds to obtain. So in addition to changes to Archnemesis before and some of the changes to the Eldritch altars, which we're about to talk about, GGG is massively buffing the ailment modifiers on jewels. In the FAQ they posted later, they said that what this is actually going to mean is that regular jewels will be able to roll up to 35% reduced duration or reduced effect, and Abyss jewels can roll up to 50% ailment avoidance. That is insane. The idea that you could have, say, 2 Abyss jewels each, which have multiple 50% ailment avoidance for specific ailments, and just completely avoid, 3 ailments at the cost of 2 jewel slots is pretty crazy, especially for early in the league when you're really struggling to get those ailments immunities going so that you can stop having some trouble when you're really, trying to get something going in red maps. A lot of people were concerned that this might mean that corruption implicits have been changed. However, GGG confirmed that the corrupted implicit modifiers on jewels are being completely unchanged. So you'll still be able to corrupt these jewels and get your corrupted blood immunity, which means you could get some really spicy ailments immunity jewels going. Now, sort of unrelated to the problems we've been facing recently with ailments, GGG also decided that unique jewels are kind of in a bad place and that most of them are trash garbage. So they've gone through and done a big overhaul for unique jewels. What they've done is all the non-desirable unique jewels have just been straight up removed from either the drop pool or from the game entirely. Some of the ones that were still used by builds have been added to other deterministic sources, such as the primordial jewels, which they haven't told us where they come from, but they come from somewhere else now. And in addition, they've added a bunch of new chase unique jewels into the drop pool. It's unclear what they mean by chase. Do they mean like headhunter or, mage blood tier? We're going to get mage blood in a jewel, just put in one jewel slot to get 4 permanent utility flasks going. Who knows? I'm sure they'll preview some of those in the reveal live stream. What this means is if you get a unique jewel drop, it'll probably be something valuable. In order to not be giving out valuable rewards as quests, they've removed unique jewels from quest rewards. And of note, one of the things that they removed was the Conqueror's Efficiency unique jewel. And what they've done is put the mana reservation modifier that jewel was used for into the core pool of jewel modifiers. So that alone could end up being a huge buff for jewels, especially in combination with the powerful ailment mitigation stats you can get on them now. One interesting side note here is that all the unique jewels are really valuable. That could make ancient orbs a lot more valuable than they have been in recent leagues, because then you might be able to buy the cheapest of these unique jewels and slam it with an ancient orb and you're guaranteed to get something else. So there could be a huge profitable flip there. Next up was their development manifesto for Eldritch Altars, and this one was sorely needed. One of the big problems in the previous league is that the requirements for builds and the overall difficulty of the game felt absolutely insane. And I think GGG correctly identified Eldritch Altars as the root cause of that. What ended up happening is that the rewards from Eldritch Altars were so good that running them felt mandatory. And this is despite the fact that Eldritch Altars massively ramped up the difficulty to huge degrees. Not only did they ramp up the damage that enemies could deal, they would also have a number of very tricky effects like inflicting the alternate ailments, which meant that your build had to be also immune to Scorch and Brittle and the like if you were running these Eldritch Altars. What ended up happening is that players would either run these and be unprepared and die a ton, but it was still correct to do that even though dying is frustrating because they were so profitable. Or they would feel that they had to play an extremely meta build that checked all the boxes that Eldritch Altars demanded of you in order to be able to run them without constantly dying. So the way GGG has chosen to address this is probably the only way they can. They've just nerfed Eldritch Altars, both the difficulty and the obscene rewards that they gave. This way, there'll still be this difficulty, boosting thing that gives more rewards, but they won't be so good that you feel like you have to opt into this, even if your character is not up to it. So how they've done that specifically is that the insane Wrath of the Cosmos keystone has been redesigned so that it works similarly to Eldritch Gaze. It's no longer going to give you those insane guaranteed upgrades to the Eldritch currency. It will instead, I believe, give you an additional upside or increased effective upsides. It's the inverse of however the other keystone works. They also nerfed Scarab rewards from altars, presumably because Scarabs are so important at endgame that anything that was such a huge source of that would always feel mandatory. So they've nerfed the Scarab rewards, but they've compensated by adding rusted Scarabs to the core drop pool. And they've added a 3-to-1 upgrade recipe for Scarabs. Now, this only goes up to Gilded. You can't make winged Scarabs like this. But this is going to have a huge impact of Scarab prices. This will probably end up raising the price for rusted Scarabs. So instead of being able to pick them up in bulk for like a third or a quarter of a chaos or something, they might get a bit pricier because people will just upgrade them to Gilded at that rate. However, it'll probably also lower the price of Gilded Scarabs, especially the ones that were really valuable at Gilded, but not so much at Rusted or Polished. So this is really going to change Scarab strats in this league probably, and this is a huge boon for players who don't want to have to trade for these snapping supplies all the time. The fact that you can just cash in your Rusteds into Gildeds or Polished it's going to feel great. Overall, they made a bunch of tweaks to difficulty and rewards and how the rewards are specifically given out. For example, instead of saying basic currency, they'll say the basic currency you're getting. And we'll have to see how all that plays out in game in order to see what that's like. And in order to make Maven a more appealing option, if you're not at a snuff to do Eldritch Altars, they have buffed it so when you run a map with Maven's influence, the map boss will have a chance of dropping an awakened gem. Now, presumably this chance is going to be very low. However, they did say that this gem has a chance to be one of the Maven exclusive awakened gems. So this is just a straight up buff to Maven strats if you're doing something like, Guardian farm strategy. Now every time you kill one of those Guardian maps, you could just get a multiple Divine Awakened gem. I mean, that's pretty bonkers, but at the cost of, unlike Eldritch Altars, which are very consistent profit, this will be very inconsistent. Either you get the huge chase drop or you don't. The last development manifesto they did with curses, which wasn't necessarily tied to a huge problem in the 3.19 league. However, curses were kind of in a weird place. Curse bots were obscenely strong, kind of back where Aura bots were prior to when they got nerfed, whenever that was, a year or so ago. And when they did the most recent curse rework and added the Doom mechanic, it was not very well received. People didn't like the Doom mechanic. It was very mechanically clunky, it was unpopular. And what they've effectively done is they have removed the Doom mechanic and rebalanced all mechanics using it to have a similar effect just without Doom. You can read the full balance manifesto if you want all the details on this one, but one of the big things they did is that they've changed hexes so that unique and pinnacle bosses no longer have a less effectiveness multiplier to your hexes. This is a huge buff to curses, and in order to compensate for this, sources that would automatically apply your hexes, such as Hex Touch and Curse on Hit rings, are getting penalties to curse effectiveness. In the case of rings, they're losing their curse effectiveness increase, and Hex Touch is just getting a less effectiveness multiplier. As part of the rework, they are buffing many hex uniques, and for the most part, this should be a huge buff for most players, I think, because curse effectiveness on, white monsters really doesn't matter. It's bosses and rares and whatnot where you're really getting the big impact, and just removing that less effect multiplier on bosses is going to make them just so much more effective, especially early in the league. So overall, how do I feel about these changes? Is this going to fix everything? Is Math Effect still going to go back to the glory days of Sentinel? What's going on here? I think that they have definitely fixed the poor state of ailments and ailment mitigation, not just through the Jewel and ailment changes, but with Eldritch Altars being nerfed and no longer feeling mandatory, and with Archnemesis being removed, the obscene requirements to have all that ailment mitigation should be much lower than they were before. They've also murdered the whole Magic Find culling of Archnemesis monsters. Thank God, that was awful, that needed to go, and it's gone. Phew. Also, Archnemesis as a whole is gone, so hopefully rare monsters aren't a nightmare to fight this league like they have been for the last 2 leagues. It remains to be seen. This new system could be rebalanced poorly, just like Archnemesis was, so we'll have to wait and see, but I'm feeling optimistic about that one. And Eldritch Altars are probably pretty fixed. The nerf to the Eldritch Keystone that gave you the guaranteed upgraded currencies was really the key thing. Everything else is just kind of minor. That Keystone was just way too good. If you weren't running it, you were just making so much less money than everyone else, even if you were constantly dying while running it. But there are some problems from 3.19 that have been so far unaddressed. Now, these development manifestos aren't going to cover everything. We still have the reveal live stream. We still have the patch notes. They could have fixes or adjustments for all of these things in there, and we just wouldn't know yet. So we got to kind of reserve judgment on this. But there's definitely something to keep an eye out for as we go into the reveal live stream tomorrow and the patch notes later. So the state of crafting in 3.19 was pretty bad. The changes they made to Harvest, in particular the removal of reforged keep prefixes and suffixes, absolutely destroyed crafting for people who weren't playing an obscene amount of hours, in my opinion. Those crafts were just so crucial. And not only did they not fix that or mention bringing those crafts back yet, it could be worse than ever. Because when they removed it and when they were justifying the removal, they said that, well, at least you still have Eldritch currency, which you can use on some slots for some builds to get kind of the same effect. Now, I never really bought that argument. I never really liked that. It's like, oh, so some builds can use this and some can't, and you're just kind of randomly screwed depending on your build. It never felt very good to me. But with the changes to Eldritch Altars, we are going to be getting a lot less of the upgraded tiers of the base Eldritch currency. which is probably going to make Eldritch currency crafting a lot more expensive for most people. So the fact that this was billed as the crafting alternative to Reforged Keep's prefixes and suffixes, and then it's nerfed, even when people kind of already didn't like the state of crafting in 3.19, has me kind of concerned. Now, this could be offset by something like the return of recombinators. We'll talk about that in a bit. But we'll have to see. I hope GGG really has something in store to either shake up or improve crafting, because if we're looking at a repeat of 3.19, that's gonna feel real bad to me, I gotta say. Another thing that is unaddressed so far is Harvest. Now, I know there are people who quite liked what Harvest ended up turning into after a couple patches from GGG, just because even if you weren't crafting, you just do it, you pick up the seeds, you turn around and sell them in bulk for huge profit. I feel like something significant has been lost here, where Harvest no longer feels like a crafting league. It feels more like a raw currency mechanic like Harbinger, because you just get this incredibly liquid currency and you turn around and sell it to other people. I really wish there was some sort of incentive to using the life force yourself, like a better exchange rate versus, making them tradable and then trading them to other players. We'll see if GGG has something like that in the works, but I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the current state of Harvest. And then there's minion survivability. They improved this with some patches, but it's still not in a great place. It just feels so terrible when you're playing a minion build and your minions die. I know that it's probably not great from a game design perspective to just make all the minions immortal or something, but surely there's some sort of better solution than just constantly nerfing minions until they start dying. It just feels so bad, especially when you do something like a Spectre and you have to go back to your hideout and summon the Spectres and summon the right ones and make sure you have the right mix, or one of them dies, you don't know which one. It's just awful. They really need to come up with a big solution to that. And if they're not buffing survivability, like, they got to do something else, or else minions are just kind of beyond the outs for survivability, quality of life stuff. There's also some lingering questions, even the things that they did address. One of the big ones is that so much of the problem with rare loot was focused around the absurd loot explosions and getting the magic find colors in. But what people might be forgetting is that strategy was only discovered about a week or so into the league. Prior to that being discovered, people were still very upset about the state of loot and map juicing in 3.19, because moving so much of the loot to rares meant that the game became all about the number of rares killed per minute. And if that's still the case, then a lot of the flaws and things that people were upset about prior to the magic find culling strategy being discovered and coming into its own will still apply in 3.20. The main argument here is that if juicing a map adds more rares to the map, but does not increase the number of rares killed per minute, then your profitability is not going up. And that really kills the map juicing thing that a lot of players loved. Now, we'll have to remain to be seen about how this new thing works out. Maybe it's not going to be so bad now that there's not the huge loot explosions. But it's definitely something to be concerned about. As much as people are celebrating the removal of Archnemesis and magic find culling being a thing of the past, it's worth noting that loot and where your loot comes from is still going to be massively, massively different than it was in Sentinel League. And it kind of remains to be seen as to whether or not it's going to feel good. It certainly didn't feel good in 3.19. One of the things I still have concerns about as well is Magic Find. While, yes, a big part of the problem in 3.19 was the fact that you knew which monsters would have the big juicy explosions ahead of time, and therefore could bring in a Magic Find color, but that wasn't the only problem introduced for Magic Find in 3.19. One of the big things that happened is that the conversion system meant that increased item rarity and increased item quantity would scale massively together, where they would multiply each other. This is what made those loot explosions so absolutely absurd when you brought in a Magic Find color. While yes, they're removing the Magic Find color strategy, if these things still stack together in this sort of exponential way, Magic Find could remain broken, where Magic Find characters could end up be getting, 10, 20 times the loot you're getting, or 50 times the loot if you look at those Divine Orb explosions that you're getting, if all of the loot still comes from rares, and if these two things still scale together exponentially. It might almost be worse than it was in 3.19, where Magic Find would still feel mandatory, but you would no longer have the option of bringing in a Magic Find character. So hopefully they look at the way these scales. This was actually specifically addressed by GGG in an FAQ. where people asked this question and they said, well, we're still figuring out the balance. We don't know yet, which is kind of a concerning answer to hear from them. Another lingering question is party play. I sort of did some hot takes in my previous videos where I said party play is bad and has always been bad in Path of Exile. Whether or not you agree with that statement, it's obviously clear that people who were doing these high-end party farms were very unhappy with how that played out in 3.19. And there's the question of, is that going to be better for them in 3.20? We don't know. Things have changed, and it could be that they find that they still don't enjoy the current state of it in the next league. There's also some questions about some of the profitability and fun of the reworked leagues, where previously Beyond and Harbinger in 3.19 really felt bad to invest in. The Beyond currency was a shadow of its former self, and Harbinger, without the Exalted Shards propping it up, just felt bad. Now, Harbinger might be better if Ancient Orbs are really good on unique jewels, but there's sort of a question as to whether or not some of these lesser mechanics that people really enjoyed in the past are going to get any kind of boost in order to make them more fun to invest in their current form. Beyond the development manifestos and the general state of the game, there was the very interesting announcement of Ruthless Mode. Now, we've known this is coming for a long time in the name of hard mode, but GGG detailed a lot of their thoughts and what they're going for in this mode in a big FAQ. And there's been an alpha that some streamers have gotten access to and recently been able to stream. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on this mode real quick. I am actually a player who is very interested in this. I've been playing Path of Exile way back from the very first week that it went on sale for early access back in the day. I have played every single version of Path of Exile. And sometimes I kind of miss the slower version where, loot was hard to come by and you weren't blazing through the map at obscene speed and progression was slow. I kind of miss that sometimes. Now, I don't always want that to be my experience, but the idea that I could have this alternate play mode where maybe once a year, if I'm not really feeling the new league or if there's not a big meta shakeup and I don't want to, dive into something that feels going to be the same, I could just play in Ruthless that league and have this retro classic experience. That seems like a lot of fun to me, and this is something that I really want to be excited for. However, some of the things GGG was talking about in this FAQ kind of seem like deal breakers. For me, the big one is the way that the challenge system works in Path of Exile. I know that a lot of players don't necessarily care about challenges and the cosmetic rewards that come with them. I do care. And if playing this mode means that I'm not going to be able to get the top end rewards or any rewards at all, really, probably, then I'm going to feel like playing it just is not an option. Because if I'm going to invest that much time, I want the challenge rewards to walk away with. So GGG did acknowledge this, and they say that they're going to look into something going forwards. I hope that they come up with something good, because in my opinion, players should not be penalized for their favorite game mode being slower or harder than the default one. A player that puts in the same amount of time and skill into their favorite game mode should get approximately the same number of challenges and challenge rewards as someone who does that in Trade League. Now, maybe some people might disagree with that. There's a discussion of what about the 40 out of 40 challenges totem? Honestly, I don't care about that stuff. I just want the fun experience that I have of chasing down challenges and walking away with these cosmetics. I need that to be intact for Ruthless to be something that I do for a league. And then the two other things that I don't like are the mandatory free-for-all loot. What are they thinking? Really? Why would you bring this back? I don't even want to talk about this. This is so bad. This just needs to be removed. GGG shouldn't have to have it explained to them why it needs to be removed. It's just ridiculous. And then I think this whole thing of talking to an NPC to refill your flasks is really dumb. They talked about how they don't want portaling out to be a free flask refill, and that's their reasoning behind this, but it still is a free flask refill. You're just adding a couple of annoying clicks to it. What's the point? I don't get it, and it sounds really stupid. I don't want to have to go talk to an NPC every single time I go back to town. I'm not a fan of that. Everything else, though, seems really cool and really interesting, and I'm excited. I want this to be something cool. I want this to be something that I check out. Honestly, as much as I hate the mandatory free-for-all loot thing and the refill flask thing, if they just fix the challenges thing, I would play this the first league it is in full release, because it just seems like such a cool alternate way to play the game, and I want to try that out and see what it's like. So I really hope they come up with something good for the challenges thing. Beyond that, I just wanted to round out this video with some predictions for what I think we might see in the reveal live stream tomorrow. I'm left with the feeling that GGG really needs a win right about now, and I expect them to go for some of those easy W crowd pleasers in this stream, which to me means I expect to see finally the return of Ultimatum and Recombinators added to the core game. We've known these Ultimatums coming for a long time. Recombinators are there and good to go. They just kind of nerf them a little bit. And if they do that, if Recombinators come back and they're still this really common thing, they're just added as a core drop, but they make it so you can't do those like insane mirrored item nonsense people are doing in standard, but otherwise keep them intact. People are going to go wild for that. People are going to be so happy. What happens in the rest of the game won't matter. People will come back saying this is Sentinel League again, the game's in a great place, etc., etc. That's kind of all they have to do, and I think they might do it. As for this new league mechanic, all we know about it is that it's called the Forbidden Sanctum. We got a quick little teaser about it, but I'm going to call my shot here. I think this league mechanic is going to be some sort of roguelike mode. It's just the vibe that I'm getting here. The name, the theming, it seems like something that's going to be this roguelike dungeon mode. And it's something that seems like it would be a great fit for Path of Exile. However, it's worth noting that GGG has kind of attempted similar things in the past, and they've pretty much all been major flops. Synthesis was the first time they really did something like this, where you'd spend a long time building up this dungeon with all the modifiers and whatnot. But then if you just got hit by that decay, the run would just end. And people hated that. People hated that part of Synthesis. Just one wrong move, you hit the decay, your whole run's over. Nuh-uh. Labyrinth was another take at the whole roguelike thing, and people also hated it. The traps would slow things down. When death ending the run was brutal for casual players. It's in a state these days where people kind of still don't like it, but they don't mind it as much. But oh my god, when it first came out, people were not a fan. And heist blueprints were kind of also the same thing, in that they're this very long ongoing thing where you could lose all your loot. And the penalty of losing your loot seems like it worked out a lot better than what they did for Synthesis and Labyrinth. But the original gameplay of Heist was not well received. This whole thing where you had to sneak past and not kill things in an ARPG, people did not like that. So while I predict this is going to be some sort of roguelike thing, I hope they're doing it in a way where it feels better than their last couple of attempts, because those were a bit rough. And it kind of feels like it should be possible. It feels like it really should be possible to have some sort of roguelike mechanic that feels good. Something that, you build up over time, then you go in, and you just get as far as you can, you get as much loot as you possibly can, and you get this giant explosion of loot, and you get to do it, Think if you did, the frequency you used to do a Cyrus battle in the old Guardian system, where just once every, 30, 40 maps, you go in and get this huge loot explosion. Something like that, I think could be very popular, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for, but honestly, it could be anything. We'll see. And speaking of finding out in the reveal stream, I intend to be streaming my reaction to the reveal live stream right here on this YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you want to hang out and chat while we see what GGG's got in store for us, you should absolutely be here. It promises to be a fun time, and it'll be my first time ever streaming on YouTube, so it'll probably be a train wreck, and hey, that can be fun too. If you like the discussion in this video, go ahead and subscribe, and I'd love to hear some comments from you guys on what you think of everything covered here. With the development manifestos, do you think GGG is doing a good job of tackling the problems and the things people didn't like about the last league, or do you think they're maybe falling short in a few areas here? And what do you think we're going to see in this reveal live stream tomorrow? You think Recombinators are coming back? I sure hope they're coming back. I love those things. In any event, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.